Good afternoon, panelists, esteemed colleagues, friends, family, maybe if you're there. I am here today to talk about Peloton Interactive Incorporated, and I apologize in advance for the number of times I'm going to say the word Peloton. I hope to excite some conversation around the idea that the life and death of disruptive platforms signals the emergence of a new paradigm in the global data-based market economy. I believe the topic is of particular interest to those of us here who are bracing for a future in policy and are keen to confront uncertainty in nuanced and alternative ways. Um, for today's agenda, I'd like to begin with a brief overview of Peloton as a connected fitness business model to highlight its features that can be generalized into a broader disruptive platform logic. Next, I will analyze some of the policy challenges posed by Peloton's model of disruption and offer up some naive speculations on why I think disruptive companies reproduce structural power asymmetries between regulators and the market. And I'll also mention why the persistence of this operative gap exposes a failure in the collective imagination of policymakers to think alternatively. I will then conclude with a few policy options that I think can bring the broader challenge into both scope and focus, with the caveat that I believe feasibility in the still nascent digital policy space often signifies an unwillingness to address the more systemic issues at hand. I personally have always felt kind of weirdly allergic and also simultaneously intrigued by everything Peloton. But as an aspiring policymaker, what interested me most about it was how they resist any singular market categorization. And for my capstone, I wanted to see how regulators tend to deal with this kind of ambiguity. But to get there, we first have to ask, of course, what is Peloton exactly? Peloton is a at-home piece of fitness equipment, but it's also 5 businesses in one. At first blush, they are a hardware manufacturer and retailer with connected stationary bikes, treadmills, and other wearables. They have also built something of a music talent media business, spending around $100 million a year on music with over 2.6 million songs under license. They've paired with numerous celebrities and companies like Spotify, Adidas for clothing lines, and hotel conglomerates to ensure there are Pelotons available in every hotel for the member away from home. And in an ancillary way, Peloton is also a massive lifestyle company to the extent that the cult of Peloton probably deserves its own inquisition. But what truly differentiates Peloton is their software and content subscription business. And for policymakers too, this is the area in which it becomes a tech or connected fitness platform with data-driven innovations and motivations worth watching. Peloton's biggest draw is, of course, its exclusive proprietary content, and their software business is not only their bread and butter, but like so many other tech companies, it's the source of their growth, albeit rocky as a platform-first company. And I say rocky because Peloton's in-house API has twice been breached, and it took the company 3 months to fix the issue around the first hack, meaning millions of people's personal data was exposed to unauthorized access during that entire time. And at its most Dickensian, the company iterated the treadlock security feature after a 6-year-old was tragically killed by their treadmill, whereby members had the option of paying $39 a month for a 4-digit passcode to lock the machine when inactive. Forgive me. We might also wonder why the company made special versions of its bike without a camera or microphone for Joe Biden and Michelle Obama, or how about Peloton's having to put on the hat of content regulator when their leaderboard feature became radicalized by alt-right sloganism? Should we as policymakers care that Peloton moved to ban political hate speech on their group and Facebook pages because of a surge in extremist and right-wing conspiracy content? Entering stage left is its most recent hardware and software addition, the Peloton Guide, which is a $400 streaming device with a body tracking camera programmed to watch your weight training workouts. The camera collects data by counting your workout reps, tracks your progress over time, and learns the area of the body that you emphasize over others. So basically, Peloton wants to know when you skip leg day. The biometric data collected by the guide is processed by machine learning on device instead of in some distant cloud server. And Peloton says it doesn't store image or video data of you while you perform the movements. It does, however, collect and store metadata. And in a draft of the guide's privacy policy, the company indicates that they will soon collect unique identifying biometric data. We are nonetheless assured that opt-in features will be offered before any facial recognition data is fully collected. Again, should we as regulators care about any or all of the above? Why might Peloton as a fitness device, instead of a platform technology, evade the attention of Canadian privacy authorities? Perhaps then one reason why Peloton is disruptive is not its novelty, but our willingness to regulate the uncertainty it creates. That said, the privacy concerns elicited by Peloton's leaky API and its gluttony for personal health data doesn't really set it apart from other firms in the platform economy. But smuggled into this database conundrum and regulatory inaction is perhaps the true disruptive logic. Peloton desperately needs to show that it can keep growing. And like all platform models, the only way to do so is to double down on its shift from products to services and to intensify their extraction, analysis, and control of data. And they must invest in the capital to do so. But in a dramatic turn, Peloton lacks this crucial last ingredient, and after an abysmal year in the market, it is rumored to be up for sale. And who's buying? Well, Apple, Disney, Nike, and Amazon have all expressed interest in acquiring Peloton as an opportunity to cross-sell from their customer base. And under current competition law in Canada, they could probably do so without infringing on the Bureau's merger enforcement guidelines. The problem with Peloton being acquired is that without the proper updates to the private sector regulation in Canada, their data will almost certainly be siphoned over to the buying entity to be stored and used to improve current and future innovations, especially things like wearables that apply most likely to quite a few regulation frameworks and their respective gaps. So on the one hand, the point I'm making is that Peloton offers a generalizable model of disruption in the way that that they have used data to bring together existing components and dynamics to create a truly novel market category, similar to the disruptions of something like Uber and Airbnb. But on the other hand, what makes them a unique example of disruptive technologies worthy of earlier identification and categorization by policymakers and regulators is how they are not big tech, or more precisely, not yet big tech. And this clues us into why building capacity around regulating uncertainty as the result of an earlier disruption has great implications for the future of the platform economy. Crucially, we should then ask, do we care about disruptive platforms like Peloton only once they're owned by big tech? Moving on to the second problem identification here it is clear that regulators lack an interface with the relevant epistemic communities on the ground, such as nonprofit privacy watchdogs and digital rights advocacy groups who organically possess the evaluative capabilities, to identify new classes of disruptive dynamics. In my research, I came across recommendations for static knowledge sharing interfaces or vulnerability repositories, which could be updated by these communities closer to the disruptive action and accessed by policymakers specifically committed to reevaluating rules and standards and to mitigating future risks in a volatile regulatory space. With disruptors like Peloton, we see that data-based consumer risk is now relevant where it hasn't been before, and that this has only increased uncertainty over who's responsible for regulating them. Primary object functions are now exceeded by network externalities inherent to database connectivity. And from a regulatory perspective, this means unanticipated threats and new risks are inconsistent with the level of consumer protection that most product safety laws currently require. While we cling to individual consent-based models for data protection and competition authorities remain ill-equipped to deal with data-driven mergers, it is increasingly obvious that personal privacy is not the only right or value threatened by the unchecked and unaccountable collection of personal information. And this is not a problem determined by Peloton's technology, but by its business practices. So moving on, Peloton's policy, I feel like I should say this is actually pretty good when it comes to protecting the data of individual users, surprisingly. But I'm more curious personally about the profits they reap from analyzing aggregate data while superficially protecting the data rights of individuals. How is it that individual data privacy can obscure something like collective data surveillance? As co-conspirators, platforms and government regulators guarantee the supremacy of individualist privacy, but do little to protect us from the collective harms that happen at the macro level. We have allowed the market to dictate the use of our data, so privacy has become our only way of articulating our discomfort with the unequal distribution of value derived from it. There are likely some of us who don't care that much about privacy, and there are others like me who think privacy is the last thing we see before we confront the core problem of socioeconomic exploitation that is inherent to the monopolization of the data commons by big tech, which hopefully that last sentence will make this joke relevant, but if not, I've just put it up there as, why don't I tell you why I've included it? The policy options that I first drew up when I started my project for regulating disruptive platform businesses like Peloton sort of looked identical to what is already underway in Canada's regulatory modernization. A toothier OPC, armed with the new CPPA, a competition framework overhaul, and the establishment of a data tribunal. essentially a better and stronger horse. It feels like the most we can do to regulate the platform economy is to implement marginal adjustments in privacy and competition frameworks, initiate new data governance schemes, or issue middling monetary penalties. These activities are still necessary, but they remain ineffectual when it comes to the structural conditions at play. We need to make room for a different question, I think. Where exactly are we going? What exactly are the policy goals across modernization frameworks? And of course, the obligatory Zizek slide. To this point, I find it interesting that when it comes to the private sector regulation, we almost never see what is now commonplace emphasis on diversity of perspective, or the importance of inclusivity and equity based in distinction, or the need to seek out alternative ways of knowing. It isn't a coincidence, I think, that the absence of alternatives for regulating the market seems to coincide with regulators being exempt from having to explore alternatives in the first place. If Canada's regulatory efforts focus mainly on suppressing the symptoms of the market economy, then they will continue chasing new versions of the same problem. Radical changes at the intersection of technology and policy might have to begin with exploring outside our inherited sense-making and regulatory frameworks that are themselves parts of the apparatus of the political economy that has permitted and facilitates the undisturbed reproduction of digital capital, which is
Jacob,
ultimately born. Whoa,
so sorry to interrupt you. You are at 12 minutes. Could you maybe take us to your next
wow.
slide so we can see your package? The time goes quick. It
It
goes
really
quick.
does. It really does. Let's go right into the options. And I'm
Thank
only
you.
going to spend time on the first and second one. The third one is still part of the hegemonic order that I was just trying to disenfranchise. But the first option that I would like to introduce is just develop and promote a institutional adoption of a policy checklist for the classification of disruptive platforms. Vas, do I have like 30 seconds to talk about each, maybe?
Why don't you leave them on screen and we will chat with you about them?
Very good.